Friends, welcome to your favorite podcast, the SuperLuchas Podcast. Another edition, we've survived another week. Ernesto Ocampo, editorial director of SuperLuchas, is with us as always. How are you, Ernesto? Very well, Milton. Very well. Here starting another edition with several issues to discuss today from the comments we've sometimes read here on the page and in the comments, thanks to those who leave them on YouTube. There have been questions regarding Ernesto, and this is a very common question that has been around for a long time. What is a booker? Because it's an American term, matchmaker. Is there any difference? And I say this quickly because there have been different issues like this is a good booker but a bad matchmaker or vice versa. But what can you tell us really? What is this? What is a booker? What is a matchmaker?
Well, in the organization of a wrestling company, you need several people behind everything, not just the wrestlers. Something basic that existed at the beginning of the 20th century was the figure of the businessman, the promoter, and the matchmaker. If we look at the Empresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre, when it started, the businessman, the one who put up the money, was Salvador Lutero, the promoter was Francisco Ahumada, and the matchmaker who was in charge of programming, of setting up the matches, was Miguel Corona, who worked in Texas and was brought to Mexico. He already had contacts with promoters from Texas, New York, and Los Angeles to bring wrestlers. So that was it. The basic concept, having those three people who were pieces of a machine. The matchmaker basically sets up the matches, decides you go against this other person. It's the same as in boxing. In boxing, the matchmakers are in charge of arranging. The best boxers against each other. In boxing, it's managed a lot with the concept of rankings, although lately it's more about boosting. The more charismatic boxers, putting them against lower quality boxers so they rise as stars, like in the case of Canelo Alvarez, for example. And in wrestling, that concept evolved a bit more when the narrative style was introduced more with stories, with angles, with rivalries. And in the wrestling jargon of the United States, they started calling them bookers. Booker from the word book, which is to reserve, just like you can say you reserve a hotel room or a flight, you reserve a date for a wrestler. It's a key word and also has a double meaning because of the book, the script, just like the scripts in the theater plays in the United States are called book. Okay, but is a booker and a matchmaker really the same? In Mexico, the term ends up being programador, the programmer. Companies have a person in charge of programming or several people in charge of programming in the case of large companies who are the ones responsible for putting together the match cards.
Ernesto, sorry to interrupt. You were just talking about the similarity it has with boxing or its origins in boxing. Nowadays, in the big companies, what is the logic behind the booking? What does a programmer or this team of programmers usually look for when putting together a card? In boxing, you already said how it is more or less, but pro wrestling has a different narrative, both in the...
In both boxing and wrestling, what you want is to sell tickets. You have to put... Maybe in UFC, you put the best against the best, but in wrestling, you necessarily have to make stars based on charisma. Maybe you can see extraordinary wrestlers at a technical level who don't connect with the audience, as they say here. They are very cold. Charisma is something innate. You can't teach it to a wrestler. Wrestling stars have to have that natural charisma to be someone, to be stars, to succeed in this world.
So there are different types of booking, and right now we'll go further, which is the same, to when there is a televised show, to when there is no televised card. I want to think that the difference between Mexican wrestling and American and Japanese wrestling also lies in how the product is presented, and there the booing is different.
Yes, in the United States, especially now because it's good, in recent decades due to the expansion of WWE, house shows took a backseat because the important thing became the TV show. Initially, TV shows were infomercials to get people to go to the arenas. Promoters paid money to local TV stations to broadcast their 1 hour weekly shows, which were sometimes recorded in studios where wrestlers didn't earn money because there was no box office, but they served to promote the event at the arena. The event at the arena was called House Show. It literally translates as box office event. That's where the money was. Wrestlers earned well. Now, the house shows are more like events that aren't televised and where the box office isn't as important because they serve more to either sell a show to a local promoter or for wrestlers to practice. They no longer have importance because the big companies don't get big revenues from those events. The big revenues currently come from television, and that's why they have to focus on making a product for television.
Okay. And in the case of Mexico, how is it centered here then? Yes, in Mexico, programming is more important for filling the arena. So the programador has to find the exact combination in boxing, in martial arts. It has a lot to do with weights. In wrestling, it's not so much based on weight, but on finding the right pairs, so to speak, to attract people to the shows.
Yes, in Mexico, wrestling hasn't, let's say, evolved or perhaps devolved to the point of becoming a TV product. In the 90s, it seemed that was the path to follow, but Televisa realized that promoters needed them more than they needed the promoters. So they told both Paco Alonso and Antonio Peña that they were no longer going to pay them for their shows and that if they wanted, they could continue broadcasting. Shortly after, they said they wouldn't even record the shows anymore, but they could broadcast them. So both WWE and the Consejo Mundial de Lucha Libre began to record their own shows. And to this day, it remains that way. If you see a show at Arena Mexico, it's a product designed to be a show, to please the audience that goes to the arena, not to please the TV audience. The shows are broadcast on various platforms as a way to promote themselves, especially the CMLL has gained a lot of international relevance thanks to this. Right now, they have deals with AEW, with MLW, with RevPro, and with New Japan Pro Wrestling. So here that concept hasn't changed much. In a way, it's better because it's more authentic. It's not something that has to be seen exclusively as a TV product. And fans who think that the style of WWE is the standard. They think that introducing concepts like working for the fixed camera is professionalizing wrestling, but no, that's nonsense.
Hey, Ernesto, and now speaking of programmers or bookers, why sometimes it is said that some are good bookers and others are bad bookers? I'll give you my opinion. It's happened to me that suddenly I see a wrestler who looks great with certain opponents, but then when you change the opponents or they are different, the level drops a lot, at least in what one as a fan sees. I mean, a good booker has to find that point where your wrestlers shine or your wrestlers adapt to styles, because not everyone necessarily adapts with everyone. I think that's a good booker.
Yes, a good philosophy is that you have to make their good points shine and hide their bad points. You have to, for example, Mystico, when they started making him famous, had to be against opponents with whom he could match his style, which is what they didn't know how to do in WWE. In WWE, they launched him against anyone, and he couldn't necessarily have good matches with everyone.
Okay, well, sorry to interrupt you. In this same sense, as you were talking and going back a bit about the standardization of wrestling in the WWE model, right now there's a lot of criticism surrounding AEW that Tony Khan or whoever is in charge of booking doesn't know how to book. They compare it to what WWE does. Is this comparison fair? To say that AEW doesn't meet the standard?
No, because they are two different styles. AEW's booking style is more similar to New Japan style. It's very different. And I know there are fans who expect it to be booked like WWE, but it's okay that it's not. Not all companies have to have the same style. TNA was the one that wanted to do and still wants to do a product similar to WWE, and they fall short. They don't have the resources to do this. They don't have the money to achieve such a product. AEW has managed to create good stories, but with a totally different narrative style.
What would be the difference between AEW and WWE? I've told you I'm not a big fan of AEW, and not because I don't like their narrative. One, it's been complicated for me to find a friendly platform to watch it, and two, sometimes their feuds haven't seemed that attractive to me. What are the main differences in the way of programming or booking or whatever you want to call it between AEW and WWE?
I think the main thing is that in AEW, stories are told through the matches many times. What happens during the match is what will have repercussions in the next match. When Will Ospreay applied the Storm Driver to Bryan Danielson, there wasn't much of a follow-up story of Bryan Danielson in the hospital returning with a neck brace, because that was going to have repercussions later for the match against Roderick Strong. It's a style that maybe not everyone likes. It's interesting, you have to pay more attention to it. In New Japan Pro Wrestling, for example, stories progress a lot based on interviews that happen after the matches. It's when they talk to the press, when they express themselves more, when they challenge their rivals, not in the ring, not through camera angles. It has a more sports-like style.
Where do you think Tony Khan gets his influences for booking? At first, I really thought he was influenced by Eric Bischoff. After they've been at each other's throats recently on Bischoff's podcast, he's torn him apart. It's clear to me that he's not necessarily his main influence. Where do you think Tony Khan gets his influence for this programming style?
Tony Khan has been a wrestling fan forever. He surely watches all the companies he can, all the companies his free time allows. Eric Bischoff wasn't. Eric Bischoff he really wasn't a fan of wrestling. It was evident in the fact that even having all the Mexican wrestlers having better WCW shows thanks to them, he relegated them, made them lose their masks, took them out of programming. Why? Because he gave too much importance to the heavyweights. He wants to find more. A balance between wrestling styles. Situations similar to WWE with matches like those we see in Japan, those we see in Ring of Honor and ECW. There's more. More richness in terms of styles.
Many fans think it's really easy to book, that it's just putting one against another and that's it, done. You were a promoter and booker at X-Law. How complicated is it? Because you were a programmer, how complicated is it to be a programmer for a company? Because many times we lose sight of the fact that the wrestler is also a human being. And there are times when they might have differences with another wrestler or their styles don't mesh, things that a fan doesn't know. But the programmer has to keep in mind to get the best out of from the match and in the end, bring money to the box office. How complicated is it to book?
It's not so much if you're in a situation like Tony Khan, if you're the booker and also the owner. I was also in situations where I was the booker and the owner was someone else. And sometimes there were misunderstandings because the owner would tell two wrestlers, for example, you are going to work and this is going to happen. And then neither of them agreed. And once I had to meet with wrestlers separately in restaurants to try to reconcile. In the end, the match didn't even happen. It was something very complicated. because you're dealing with egos, not just of the wrestlers themselves, but of the promoter, of other people who are also within the company. And ultimately, the goal is to get people to the arena, and that doesn't always happen.
Do you consider then that sometimes working with someone is more complicated than being an owner and promoter? Obviously, but sometimes it's very complicated. Who are the programmers in Mexico that you recognize as having been more successful? Also, well, Antonio Peña would be the best, but he wasn't even the programmer as far as I remember. No, yes, Antonio.
Peña was indeed good at Arena Mexico. He was the head of public relations, but he gained Paco Alonso's trust to become the booker for Friday events. Juan Herrera, who was the official programmer, kept the Sunday events. And Herrera's group, which was basically the wrestlers from Guadalajara, the students of Diablo Velasco, were the ones working on Sundays, while Antonio Peña introduced his new characters for television events. There he showed he had a lot of vision. He created many big stars that became the foundation of AAA a few years later. In this sense, I think Antonio Peña has been the most successful booker in the history of Mexican wrestling.
And little by little, Antonio Peña's legacy is being lost, at least in AAA, in my very personal opinion. But, well, I think time generates new perspectives. Ernesto, just to wrap up these topics, so the way of booking is different in each country, since some are television shows and others are live events. For the people, in your view, will Mexico remain the same in terms of booking for the people and not so much for television? Don't you see in the short term that once again Televisa or these new platforms, Netflix, HBO, see an opportunity in Mexican wrestling and turn it into a television program? Not broadcasting wrestling events, but creating a wrestling television show.
Well, it was already attempted with Lucha Underground. Right now, I think the CMLL has possibilities. In the short term, to make their show part of a large streaming platform. At this moment, there would be interest, especially because a large part of the fans who attend Friday events are foreign tourists. If you look at the ringside area of Arena Mexico right now, there are many Americans who come to the events. A program like that could be made for Netflix, something more authentic that could bring great dividends to the company.
In that same sense, it wasn't a topic that was planned right now, but there are more and more Mexicans abroad. We'll do a more contemporary program later, but I was seeing that more and more in AEW, in WWE, in small indie companies. There are Mexicans working permanently, thanks to the visa, obviously. But what do you think is the reason that lately there are more Mexicans abroad and on a consistent basis? There have always been Mexicans going to the United States for Latino shows. This area of opportunity to earn a few bucks has always existed. But lately there seems to be a sort of boom of Mexican wrestlers, and sometimes they don't necessarily go through one of the big companies like AAA or CMLL.
It's globalization. They are wrestlers who can now go everywhere because they can also send their work to other promoters via the internet. They can send a video to promote themselves. Right now, there is a lot of interest in Mexican wrestling in the United States. Because of that, many promoters in areas like Los Angeles and Chicago bring many Mexican wrestlers to work there. This was always the case, especially in Texas. But now it has become more common. I can say there are at least 3 Mexican wrestling companies in New York, not to mention. There is already a lot of respect for the Mexican style, but it has more to do with globalization. They are modern phenomena, like what I was saying earlier about foreigners in Arena Mexico, which for many is a gentrification of Arena Mexico, which is not an appropriate concept considering that gentrification has more to do with urban spaces. If all these are things we have to experience thanks to modernity.
I don't see you very convinced, like very excited about modernity. I don't see you.
Well, it's just what we got. Yes, we lived through other times, and in a way it was more It was better to see wrestling as something belonging to the people, something of the lower classes, and we kind of felt more connected to that. But on the other hand, it's not bad either that it becomes something bigger, that there are foreigners at the shows, that there are people from other social classes at the shows, people who used to see wrestling as something degrading, who didn't dare to admit they were fans of wrestling, and now they go to the shows. In a certain sense, that's good.
Do you know what's the only thing missing, Ernesto? I think it's more serious coverage by sports media. I mean, I think that's still lacking, at least in Mexico. I think in the United States, they've managed a bit with ESPN and these networks covering wrestling at certain times, professionally, and not so much as mockery or a topic of ridicule. I think here in Mexico, sports programs or sports networks still don't consider wrestling as part of a sports review. They still consider it when some artist appears or when there's a loss of a mask. They show it small somewhere that so-and-so lost the mask, lost the hair, masks more than hair. I think it lacks that respect from the journalistic field.
It's that sports coverage in Mexico is reduced to soccer. If they cover other sports, it's not so much because they want to, but so they can call it their sports section. If it were up to them, it would be pure soccer, and more soccer. Sports channels in Mexico are all about soccer. If you're going to buy a sports network like Fox Sports, you're going to buy it only if it has contracts with soccer teams. Otherwise, why would you want it? We're in a soccer-loving country. Many say wrestling is the second most popular sport after soccer. I don't know where they got that data from. I don't think it's true.
To start, what do you think is the second most popular sport? Baseball?
Yes, baseball is immensely popular in many areas of the country. Maybe not so much in the center of the country. Yes, and boxing too. Yes, it's much more popular than it.
Wrestling, even if you don't like Canelo, but oh well.
Well, boxing's popularity has decreased. Arena Mexico used to have weekly boxing events. When I worked designing posters, I made the Sunday Coliseo posters, Saturday boxing ones, Tuesday wrestling, and Wednesdays boxing. Also at the Coliseo. Saturdays there was boxing at Arena Mexico. Yes, there was a lot of vision that there would be. Times like those produced boxers. Stars were created before. Right now, how can you create a star if not with TV shows?
And before there were even these neighborhood tournaments and golden fists. Well, in Mexico City, I mean here in the north,
boxing was also an opportunity to try to escape poverty. They saw it like if you manage to become a star, you can earn millions of pesos and become famous, like so many did.
Well, closing, we started with wrestling and ended with boxing. We're almost done with this edition. Thank you to each and every one of you. Ask you again to leave your comments, subscribe, like the page, activate notifications on the bell, and anything else. Ernesto, see you in the next edition. Thank you very much. This was Super Luchas, the podcast.